All right, we're going to go ahead and go through notes number 4 in module 4 here and talk about polymers. So a polymer is just some material that's composed of many different monomers that are linked together to make a chain. So for example, over on the right here, we're looking at a polymer. So this polymer over on the right is a polymer where we have a chain of carbons going down the middle. Now on each carbon, there's either two H's or an H and a Cl. So in this chain, we have this monomer where if we zoom in on just this part in the center here, we keep having these two carbons with a total of three H's and a Cl combined together. So we have that one monomer there. Now if we keep looking, we keep seeing that same repeating unit. We have another one here, another one here, another one here. Now in theory, this just keeps going on forever in any direction. Now it's not actually forever, right? At some point it stops, but we just have these individual links in the chain connected together. So each of those links is called a monomer, and then the overall thing together is called a polymer. Now the example that we're showing here is polyvinyl chloride, or PVC. Now most of you have probably worked with PVC in the past and know kind of what it is. It's just a rigid pipe. Now, many different plastics that we have in our life, so like water bottles, PVC pipes, stuff like that, are just called human polymers, right? And so instead of calling them human-made polymers, we just call them plastics. Now, polymers are typically derived from petroleum products for plastics, and petroleum is just a crude oil that can be found inside the earth, right? So when we dig and you see like oil being dug out of the ground or fossil fuels, that is petroleum. Now, we can take different parts of that petroleum to make different things. Now, one of the things that we can make is plastics, right? We can take them and make different polymers. Now, there are two main types of polymers that we can kind of sort things into. We can either have a thermoplastic or a thermoset. Now, thermoplastics are things that soften when they're heated or when they're cooled. So Legos are an example of a thermoplastic, right? If you get a Lego really hot, eventually it melts, right? And its shape will change. A thermoset, on the other hand, is something that once it's formed, they can't be melted. So if I mix it together, it's not going to change its shape at all. So one example of a thermoset that you can actually see in our classroom are the lab benches. Right, the lab benches are thermosets, and we chose them to be thermosets when we designed this classroom because we want to be able to perform experiments on them where they're not going to melt and get soft in the middle of some experiment. So the lab benches are some polymer that we've created that doesn't melt. So it's a thermoset. So what I want you to try and think of now, what type of material would you use to make a recyclable water bottle? A thermoplastic or a thermoset? Try and think about their properties and make a decision and then explain your answer. Okay, let's go ahead and go through what our answer would be here. So for this one, the best option would be thermoplastics. Now, the reason thermoplastics would be better for recyclable water bottles is in order to be recyclable, we have to be able to reshape it somehow into something new, right? So I take a piece of plastic, I need to be able to somehow crush it up and then remake it into a new water bottle after that. So if we had a thermoset, we can't really take it and then remelt it and then shape it into something else. Whereas if we have a thermoplastic could be melted, and then after we melt it, we could just mold it into something new. So I take the water bottle, crush it into small pieces, melt it down, and then I can make it into a new shape. So that makes it a little bit easier to recycle. Okay, let's go ahead and continue and talk about the 4 different shapes of polymers that we can have. So in here, we have the 4 different shapes listed. Those 4 shapes are linear, branched, cross-linked, and network. So for a linear polymer, it just means there is a single chain. So we just have one chain running through. And so we have this one chain running across, and then we have a second chain running across. So we just have 2 linear polymers next to each other. Now in a branched compound, you still have that same chain going across like we did in the linear, but you also have these branches coming out. So these branches sticking out will change their properties slightly. So we'll talk more about what those properties are later, but for now we just know that we have these little things reaching off of that main structure. Now, in a cross-linked polymer, again, we still have those same straight chains, but now instead of just having branches, we have these connections from one polymer to the other. So I have this connection from chain 1 to chain 2 and chain 2 to chain 3 over here. So we call those cross-links because they're links crossing between 2 chains. And lastly, we have network polymers. So in network polymers, each monomer is connected by chemical bonds to multiple other monomers. So it's not just one long chain of monomers, It's that every monomer is connected together. So when we have every monomer connected together, we get some different properties. So we call these ones network polymers. Now let's go ahead and talk about the properties of each one of these. So starting with linear polymers. So linear polymers resemble like spaghetti chains, right? So they're really, really long chains, and they're held together only by intermolecular forces. Now, what intermolecular forces they're held together by depends on the monomer. So for example, if my monomer was just something that looked like this structure here is nonpolar. So because this structure is nonpolar, that would mean that I have only London dispersion forces between my polymer chains. That's all I would get. Whereas if I just replaced one of these hydrogens with a chlorine, now this would have dipole-dipole attractions between chains because this is a polar polymer. And if I replaced one of these with an O and an H, now I have one that has hydrogen bonding between chains. So the intermolecular forces of the monomer help you figure out what the intermolecular forces of the polymer are. Now for linear structures, because they're just straight lines, the chains of polymer are able to get really, really close to each other. So because the chains can get really close to each other, they tend to have slightly stronger intermolecular forces than some of our other polymers. Now, the last thing is that because they're only held together by intermolecular forces, they're thermoplastics. Because if we heat them up, those intermolecular forces get broken, and then the polymer would melt. So that explains why linear polymers are thermoplastic, right? They're only held together by intermolecular forces, so just like ice can melt and be refrozen, polymers are the same, right? When you melt ice, you just break intermolecular forces. When you melt a thermoplastic, or in this case, a linear polymer, it also just breaks those intermolecular forces. All right, now let's go ahead and look at branched polymers. So in a branched polymer, it's very similar to a linear polymer, right? It just has that same chain, but now it has that branch reaching out. So these branches prevent the polymer chains from getting really close to each other. So because those branches are slightly further apart, the intermolecular forces are weaker. So because the intermolecular forces are weaker, they tend to be slightly easier to melt. They also tend to be less dense because those chains have to be further apart from each other. So at this point, I've explained why a linear polymer is thermoplastic. I want you to try and explain why a branched polymer is a thermoplastic now. So go ahead and try out that explanation. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about it. So thermoplastic or branched polymers are thermoplastics, again, because they're only held together by intermolecular forces, right? It's just going to be whatever the intermolecular forces of the monomer are holding everything together, so it's easy to melt them and reform. Now let's take a look at cross-linked polymers. So cross-linked polymers have these links tying one chain to another. So when we have these chains tied together, it means that they're connected via covalent bonding or maybe ionic bonding, depending on what that cross-link is. So because we have a chemical bond holding them together, they're much stronger than a linear or a branched polymer because they're connected by a stronger bond. So because they're connected by a stronger bond, they're harder to break apart. So what I want you to try and explain is why are cross-linked polymers stronger? Go ahead and make an explanation there. All right, let's go ahead and go through our answer here. So because they are connected by these strong covalent bonds or ionic bonds, they're going to have a stronger structure. Now, the last thing that's not necessarily mentioned here so far is that they're thermosets, right? Because they have these strong covalent bonds, they're not going to be able to be heated and broken and reformed, right? When you melt something, you aren't breaking covalent bonds, you're just breaking intermolecular forces. So if you break the intermolecular forces, you're then going to, if you can't break the covalent bonds, you're not going to be able to melt this. If you do get it hot enough where those covalent bonds start breaking, now you're not just melting it, you're actually changing the chemical structure. So that's then going to react in some way. It's going to burn or not melt, all right? All right, now let's go into our last type of polymer. This is called a network polymer. So network polymers are heavily linked to make a complex network of three-dimensional covalent bonds. So that's what we're showing here, right? Each monomer is connected to every other monomer by some chemical bond. Now, because they're connected only by covalent bonds, you can't soften them, right? There's no intermolecular attractions to break and melt. So instead, these are thermosets. All right, so the next question, diamond is a polymer. Based on the properties that you know of diamond, I want you to try and guess what type of polymer diamond is. So go ahead and make a guess, an explanation, and then we'll go through our answer. All right, let's go ahead and explain here. So our correct answer for this is that diamond is a network polymer. So we can guess it's a network polymer because it's extremely strong, right? Diamonds are one of the hardest materials. So because they're one of the hardest materials, we can guess that it's probably a network polymer. Now we also know that a diamond can't melt, right? If you get a diamond really hot, it doesn't melt into a new shape. It just stays locked together because of the strong three-dimensional covalent bonds. All right, that's it for polymers. Thank you for watching.